On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. We are the official podcast of the Lot 1 Tailgate Party, which is at Lambeau Field every home game. This is episode 94, created December 9th, 2024. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota and Neil on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
I was looking for a beer from either Michigan or from Seattle, but I encountered this lovely color scheme in this beer from Other Half Brewing Company, the Big Nelson Vibes Double Dry Hopped IPA.
Good evening, gentlemen. Tonight I'm having an old-fashioned with Hatch Distillery Dock Wall Whiskey and Bada Bing cherries.
Neil, I was able to find a Wisconsin beer for you. This, in fact, is very local. This is a homebrew. It has no name. It was crafted by my neighbor, John, across the street. I look forward to giving it a try. You can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast, Green Bay Chat. And just the audio is available on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify by searching for Green Bay Chat. Well, we are through week 14 in the season, and we're going to take a look back at that Thursday night matchup with the Detroit Lions. With 4 games left in the season, we'll take a look around the league and who has a playoff push coming. But then we'll talk about our own Week 15 matchup, Sunday Night Football at Seattle. And there's maybe a little bit of history with those Seattle Seahawks. Final score Thursday night, Packers-Lions in Detroit, 34-31, the rare back-to-back Thursday games for the Packers and the Lions, in fact, who both played on Thanksgiving. This was not Green Bay going into Detroit like last year on Thanksgiving, but a game nonetheless that was a bit wilder than I think maybe we expected, Neil.
I have no idea how to interpret what happened in this game. You can look at it positively. You can look at it negatively. You go the way Jeff was in our text thread on Thursday night, where he was apoplectic. You could go in any direction and you would probably be correct.
Maybe they don't want you to interpret that game, Neil. That is just the way they wanted it to end up.
It was brutal.
Jeff, we were ahead in the fourth quarter, okay? It was not a brutal game anytime you're ahead in the fourth quarter. And if we make a defensive stop on a fourth down, we've got the opportunity to win that game. That's the positive spin, is it was so close in so many different ways.
It was.
Full disclosure for everyone, though, at the end of that game, we were worried about Jeff. We made sure he did not get near the shower rod. He just was beside himself. This, I think, Jeff, was the most devastating 3-point loss in your life. Yeah. That I can't imagine how terribly you took. Jeff, I want you to just go down there. I want dark Jeff. Give me 2 minutes of dark Jeff. Go.
Oh, my God. Where do I start? I mean, we can start with the refs. And I'm not going to blame it on the refs. I just want consistency. That's all we've talked about. I want consistency. And oh my God, did we not get it, right? 105 yards in the first half. That was awful. That was just bad. They weren't ready to play. Then you have Detroit coming in and they're just being dicks, right? The players were just going to push our buttons. And guess what? It worked. So as a professional football team, how Matt LaFleur didn't warn these guys to expect this kind of petty shit, they seem so unprepared. So they're unprepared. The defense played okay, but then you get the offense just kept stepping on their dicks. Then we made it close, and we're thinking, oh, maybe something good can happen here until it doesn't. And then it just, yeah. How's that?
Are they even going to win another game, Jeff?
Well, that was part of the discussion at the end, wasn't it? So it's either, okay, are they going to bounce back from this? Because based on the post game, it seemed like they would. Said, okay, we're going to see Detroit again. And in some cases, I don't know, do they win? Do they go 500 the rest of the season just because it's a demoralizing loss? I don't know. I hope not. I mean, they should be able to win out, I would think. But Jesus, I mean, consistency.
I'm going to start out, though, with the fact that we were on the road and we lost by 3. That basically means at the score level that these teams performed very similarly. Yes. And we've got to take into account that if you look at Detroit's first drive, they go right down the field and score on their first drive. And this was a terrifying start for the game. And it's followed by Jordan Love being sacked on our first offensive play. This was a terrible start for the game before things started to settle down. And when things started to settle down, that things started to move in our direction eventually. But I really want to go with the inconsistency that Jeff talked about, in that the Packers had -4 net yards passing in the first quarter. In the first half, if you ignore the 20 yards they got on the fumble by Christian Watson, we only had 4 net yards passing other than that Watson fumble in the entire first half. Our passing game was not going at all in the first half. And in contrast, in the second half, we only had 17 yards rushing from our running backs in the second half. We could not put a game together in any one of those quarters. There were certainly plays that we strung. There were moments of absolute brilliance from our offense and from our defense. It was just never putting the pieces together.
So how is the game tied with 2 seconds left on the clock? Green Bay is still 4 of 5 in the red zone. Both teams 4 of 5 in the red zone. Both teams score 4 touchdowns. Both teams have a field goal in there. It's 31-31. And maybe it's just the way the game ended for both of you. That feeling of helplessness. You know you can't do anything to stop Detroit moving down the field. And you're just watching the defense, who doesn't seem to be interested in doing anything to stop Detroit marching down the field either. I think it's just, you take that last 2 seconds out of the game, I think you are looking at this much better. I mean, Neil, even at one point, Green Bay was ahead in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and we stopped them. Our defense stopped them. So the problem is that Detroit had 4 drives that were 70 yards, and that last drive would have gone 70 yards if they needed to score a touchdown. But we did have several drives where Detroit basically did nothing, and then you throw in the best drive where you had the Keyshawn Nixon interception that we were able to actually convert on. There were a lot of things that worked well in this game.
And here's the thing. I sort of felt like taken advantage of a little bit. And what I mean by that is because Dan Campbell kept fucking going for it on fourth down and being successful. The one time he wasn't, worked to our advantage, and we get the ball back on the 30-yard line, and we go ahead and score the touchdown. Okay, that was huge. But the fact that the defense could not stop Detroit on fourth down, there were 2 touchdowns scored on fourth down, was just brutal. And that's what kept that last drive going. And the fact that he went for it in field goal range on fourth down, that's one of those where on TV, kind of just, this is the way he is or whatever. I think that was fucking stupid. I mean, that was just, I so wanted that to come back and bite him in the ass. And when it didn't, and when the Packers couldn't stop that fourth down, that's what got me going. And one of the many things that did, but especially that, like, come on, here's a golden opportunity. This guy's handing this to you. Stop him. And they couldn't do it.
Yeah, but I mean, it was a 4th and 1. It wasn't a 4th and 5. It wasn't a 4th and 10. It was a 4th and 1. The math favored what Dan Campbell did, because guess what? The Packers never got the ball back. That worked out perfectly for them.
It's brutal to watch.
Oh, right. There's no way you can argue. These fourth down conversions are easily demoralizing, but this is the team that you know is going to go for it in these short situations. I'm going to go back to what I said last week going into this game, where I said I thought Green Bay would go into this game very vanilla. They weren't going to put a lot of looks out there. I think this is a setup. I think Green Bay sets this up to say, hey, now Detroit thinks they can get away with fourth downs. And when we see this team in the playoffs, defense is going to put a stop.
John, you've been spending too much time in conspiracy
because you don't
theories.
need this win. You don't need this win. That win was not needed. So, and it's not a throwaway game, Jeff. If they had gone out and lost 34-7, I would say, yeah, okay, that was lackadaisical and they threw it away. For them to go out and not show anything and still play Detroit to a tie to 2 seconds left in the game says something about the strength of this Packer team. I think it plays to I know you were concerned, Jeff, that Matt LaFleur got out-coached here by Dan Campbell. I'm saying this was cards to the vest and allowing for LaFleur to turn the tables.
Sorry, John.
When January rolls around.
Sorry, John. Jeff's right about this one. He may have overstated the situation basically in everything else in his rant, but there's no question that Matt LaFleur was outcoached by Dan Campbell in this game. And there were just so many different ways in which we were inconsistent. And this stands in contrast to the consistency. This is what Detroit did better than we did in the game. I just want to go through Jared Goff's stats by quarter. Quarter 1, 7 of 10. Quarter 2, 7 of 10. Quarter 3, 8 of 11. Quarter 4, 10 of 10. They were having consistent drives that advanced the ball in every single quarter. In contrast, Love in the first half, 3 of 7 for 31 yards. Again, 20 of those on the fumble. Second half, much better, 9 of 13 for 175 yards. But the fundamental aspect of our second half, it's really been a truth for a lot of this season, is we've been really reliant on the home run balls. And the home run balls to Christian Watson were a huge part of that game and why this game was close, because we did not have the ability to make consistent drives moving down the field. And our inability to run the ball in the second half, or our lack of effort in trying to run the ball in the second half, is as much as anything. And we talked about how we are doing plays where we're sort of focusing on one player for short periods of time. So I said Jacobs was 9 rushes for 17 yards in that second half. There were no rushes by either Wilson or Brooks in the first, third, or fourth quarter of that game.
And Jaden Reed really has no stat line. Why? Because Green Bay doesn't want to put anything on tape. I mean, Neil, these numbers, these statistics you give are great, but for 59 minutes and 58 seconds, both teams score 31 points. Again, the only statistic that matters. I don't care about the rest of it. If those numbers for Detroit are so great and Dan Campbell outcoached Matt LaFleur so well, why are we tied at 31 with 2 seconds left in the game?
Here's another piece. The players that Detroit was playing with, these are guys that were literally off the street and recently signed. They had little, if any, reps, and it seemed like the Packers either were confused by it, they weren't communicating. The offensive line, they couldn't block.
Jeff, you know what was happening, though, on the passing plays? I was watching this for much of the game. Detroit was sending 5 against our offensive line for much of the game. Dan Campbell was trying to bring it against the Packers, whereas we couldn't put any pressure on Jared Goff because most of the time we were going with 4 against their line. And, the inability to provide any pressure in this game was absolutely an impact. I mean, yes, there was only the single sack on Jordan Love. That is one of his skills, is not getting sacked, but he was under pressure. He was harassed. He was making fast passes throughout the game, whereas Jared Goff seemed to always have enough time to throw the ball 5-10 yards downfield and to advance the ball when they needed to advance the ball.
Right. You've got 4 men rushing on the Packer defense because your backfield is depleted, right? Jair's out of the game. Stokes can't do shit. Evan Williams and Javon Bullard are injured. Zane Anderson had 4 professional snaps going into this game. He played, I believe, 75% of the game, Neil.
53 snaps for Zane Anderson on defense in this game. But if your D-backs are going to have problems defending, isn't that the Fritz Schirmer argument that should be sending 5 or 6 people to at least give them a chance so they don't have to cover them for as long?
Right. That's why I keep saying with Jeff Hafley, please be less Joe Barry and more Fritz Schirmer. It would be nice to see it happen that way. But to Jeff's point, you're talking about, yes, Detroit, I understand they had guys coming in and they're depleted as well. Green Bay on the defense is equally as depleted.
They are. I mean, listen, Jair Edgerrin-Cooper, Evan Williams, and Javon Bullard are certainly 4 of our best 5 or 6 players on that defense, at least how they've been playing this year, not based on how they're paid, but based on how they've been playing this year. And to have all of those players out for either the whole game or for significant portions of the game absolutely impacted our game calling. It impacted our play. Again, Zane Anderson with 53 snaps. I mean, that says an enormous amount as far as what happened in that game. That's basically this number of Bullard and Williams combined in the game. But that means that you've got to actually do things differently in order to prevent them from walking down the field. And I think this goes back to what I said earlier, that they had 4 drives of 70 yards plus that last drive that would have gone 70 yards if they needed to. We couldn't stop them consistently. We stopped them on a couple drives, but there were a lot of long drives that Detroit had in this game.
Well, we never lost ground score-wise. I mean, you're still, again, dealing with a tie score. But 2 seconds
fundamentally,
remaining.
this is because the home run balls to Christian Watson. You look at Jordan Love's stats, and Jordan Love had 206 passing yards in the game. 114 of those yards were to Christian Watson. right?
Yeah,
I mean,
and
essentially we needed the home run balls in order to make this work. And thankfully those home run balls worked more often than they didn't.
Yeah. One
Well,
target, no catches to Jaden Reed either.
yeah. I mean, it was the short field. So twice we had a short field with the interception by Nixon and the turnover on downs at their own 30-yard line. I mean, the fact that Detroit ran 31 more plays than we did, and that's the consistency that the Detroit offense had versus, yeah, can we score almost, I would say it will, but that's what was keeping us in the game by just chucking the ball up. What you want to see is more of the consistency because, I mean, when Detroit got that ball with 2-3 minutes left to go, were you thinking, oh, the defense is going to make a stand here and we're going to get the ball back?
No, I already said
No. Well, that's sort of a problem, don't you think?
But Jeff, with 31 more plays on offense and still only scoring the same amount of points through 59 minutes and 58 seconds, and you have the audacity to say that Dan Campbell outcoached Matt LaFleur. How? They scored the same amount of points. It is the only statistic that matters.
But the other statistics give an insight into how the game went. And the fact that we had 0 passing first downs in the first half. We had 0 passing or running first downs in that first quarter. I mean, our only person. It sounds like you're sucking ass. It's not vanilla. It's fucking sucking ass. Shitty play is not vanilla. It's shitty play.
I think I will stand on my case here that Green Bay did not put anything on tape in this game that is going to help Detroit if we see them again in January. And we can talk then again about who's out coaching who, based on, in my opinion, this game being a setup. As a fan, from a fan's perspective, I am absolutely not concerned about this loss. We were getting ready for putting this episode together, and I told these guys I had to review everything because the game was 4 days ago. I've already forgotten it because that's how much I think it was irrelevant. I think that looking at the way this season's going to end, Minnesota's got an easy schedule. Green Bay has their schedule. I think that we're trying to battle, again, like I said, for either the 5 or 6 seed. Eventually, someone's going to pull that horseshoe out of the Vikings' ass, and they're not going to be as lucky as the season ends here. And I think that's what this team was doing. I think they were looking down the road at how to strategize where they need to be when January rolls around.
John, right now I'm debating how much of what you're saying just to cut out because it's so stupid.
No, it's not stupid at all. Why? There was absolutely no way this team was going to win the division. There was absolutely no way. That's not the issue.
You still want to win this game. You still want to win this game. And they were trying to win this game. It's just they were not executing appropriately for winning this game.
So I was watching this at home. John, you were watching this at home. Neil, you weren't watching this at home. Tell us about that experience.
I was in Los Angeles for personal reasons, and I was able to watch this game at the Los Angeles Packers Supporters Club at Mom's Bar in West Los Angeles. And I had a really good time. It's something where I've gone to a number of different Packers bars over the year for games, and the experience at Mom's was among the best that I've ever had at a road type Packers bar. And it was a place that was filled. They had free bratwurst, they had free summer sausage, free cheese, crackers, whatever you wanted. And then they had the DJs where anytime there was a chance to play some Packer songs, they were playing Packer songs. It was essentially a full house for that game. They were certainly very happy. It was a 5 p.m. game. So it's something that was a relatively reasonable game time for those Los Angeles fans. They do not so much like the noon starts that start at 10 a.m. for them, but it was a really great group of fans. It was a really great supporters group. There was one Lions fan that happened to show up, but they were doing the Go Pack Go throughout. It was a fun day in Los Angeles.
All right, now Neil, compare your Los Angeles Packers supporters. Is that what they're called? LAPS, Los Angeles Packers supporters?
No, it's like this. It's like the Southern California Packers fanatics or something along those lines.
But LAPS, LAPS would be a good acronym. But compare that to your friends in Philadelphia, the Milk Boy Packers Club.
I mean, Milk Boy in Philadelphia is just a much smaller club than the one in Los Angeles. I mean, Los Angeles Metro is, it's the second largest city in the country. They've got a great group of people who were there, and it was fun. And I actually just want to play their celebration of one of the Packers touchdowns.
having banged the drum by Todd Rundgren on cue, ready to go for a score. That is key. How are the drink specials, Neil?
They did have an old-fashioned special. I did not take advantage of it because I had to drive to the airport afterwards, but it was a very Wisconsin atmosphere there, and a lot of the people who were there are Wisconsin expats. So the organizer, Dan Port, is from outside of Milwaukee. His brother's a season ticket holder. His dad was a season ticket holder before then. It's somebody who's had a strong connection to the Packers for a long time. And you could tell from the people who were there. You saw the cheeseheads. You saw all of the different accoutrements. This was the feeling of being in Wisconsin because, well, a lot of the people who were there were originally from Wisconsin.
And again, Neil, a lot of great enthusiasm at the bar there. I'm sure you and the fans had a good time, but let's talk about enthusiasm on the field. This Packer team, we talked about the defense. Injuries plagued the team throughout this game. And the people who came in, they didn't seem ready to play maybe. And Jeff, you even mentioned it, the number of plays that Detroit ran on the offense. Neil, this defense was gassed a bit.
Again, going back 31 more plays for the Packers defense compared to the Packers offense. And Xavier McKinney, 80 plays on defense and 12 on special teams, 92 total plays for Xavier McKinney. That is not going to keep Xavier McKinney his best. McDuffie and Quay, again, over 80 plays total. Nixon, 79 plus 12, 91 total plays for Keyshawn Nixon in the game. Even Zane Anderson was up to 72 total plays, defense plus special teams in the game. It's tough to be on the field for that long and be fresh at the end. No matter how much your brain says, I've got to make a stop, the body has limitations. And this, I think, was certainly a problem at the end as well. Yes, there were potentially schematic issues. There were missing players, but we've got to acknowledge that these players were really worn out by the end of that game.
You know, the question always comes up, but Detroit's offense was on the field for that many plays as well. Why aren't they equally as tired? It's a mental factor, and the concept there is that the offense knows where everything is going. It's easier for them because they know where everything is going. For the defense, it's a chase. It's the harder part of that chess match. So it is physically and mentally tasking, and those two things combined, that is what gets you a little bit more exhausted, especially if you find yourself out of position and you've got to make up for it, things like that. So yeah, it's tougher for a defense to be out there that many plays.
Well, on top of it, running backs and wide receivers do rotate. Our D-backs and our linebackers were not rotating. So essentially, they were able to rotate fresh players in that were able to exploit the back half of our defense.
And I think that's why they held Amon-Ra St. Brown in check for most of the game until basically the last couple drives. And I think maybe that's where fatigue did start to come in, where all of a sudden the guy who had just been blocking, who's their top receiver, basically wasn't involved really that much, at least with catching passes. And then all of a sudden he was. And that was also sort of the beginning of the end, at least on that last drive.
Right. But the other strength that Detroit had, in addition to the consistency of Jared Goff, is that he was going to take whatever the defense gave him. And Detroit had 6 different receivers with 5 or more receptions that game. Basically, whoever gets open, I'm going to throw it to you. And when you've got that level of time to throw the ball that allows you to go through your different progressions and just find out whoever is going to be open, that's going to make it much easier to exploit a defense, especially a defense that is getting worn out.
Yeah, especially in the intermediate routes too. They weren't throwing a lot of long balls at all, but it wasn't the line of scrimmage passes necessarily either. It was that 5 to 10 yard cushion that they were getting, and that was just play after play after play after play for success.
Yeah, and Rashawn Gary, the only sack on the game. So, yeah, you have a lot of situations where that defense isn't getting home. But like we said earlier, they're not bringing as many people at the quarterback as maybe we would have liked. And maybe that fatigue factor is part of that. I think that if you look at it and say, okay, we've got to do what we can to keep the play in front of us from a passing perspective. Again, they held their own. They still hold Detroit to 31 points in the game, 34 in the last 2 seconds.
Yeah, but I mean, it was almost 400 yards on 76 plays. So again, they were just methodical. We couldn't seemingly do anything about it. They only hurt themselves, Detroit, when they didn't get that 4th down conversion deep in their own territory. Otherwise, they were 11 of 15 between 3rd and 4th downs and conversions, which was just amazing. Again, that frustration, you knew it was coming. It's not like Dan Campbell all of a sudden decided this game, hey, I'm going to go for it on fourth down a lot. This is what he's known for. So again, sort of that player prep, that be ready on fourth, after a third down that's not converted. If it's 3-4 yards, be ready, regardless where it is on the field, be ready for the fourth down play. And that was another thing, not getting in the gaps, not just seemingly being prepared on defense when these fourth down plays were run. And the clock management, that one timeout really would have been great to have back as well towards the end of the game. So again, a lot of factors. Yes, it was close, but it was the little things that came back and bit us in the ass, whereas Detroit was able to execute and do exactly what they needed to be in position to kick that field goal at the end.
Right. But the key big picture is the Packers came out of that game angry, and they came out of that game thinking that they could, with just a few things different, actually beat Detroit. They came out of that game, I think, with belief, and that's something that is going to help us moving forward.
Right, exactly what I've been saying, Neil. They didn't show anything, and they still played Detroit to a 3-point game. Hey, we really didn't talk about special teams either.
We didn't have to. They didn't suck.
Exactly. Brandon McManus, a 32-yard field goal. That's his real opportunity there. Daniel Whelan, 3 punts, averaging 41.7 yards, but he dropped 2 of them inside the 20-yard line. But like you said, Jeff, yes, they didn't suck. If we don't have to talk about special teams,
that's a win.
It's a win.
The key special teams stat of the game is that there were 12 drives that started on the opponent's 30-yard line, because basically teams mostly scored. They kicked off in the end zone and started in the 30, and that's where everything went. It was a game that was played by the offense and the defense, not played by the asshats.
Yeah. Final score, once again, 34-31. Detroit taking 2 games from the Packers this season. Detroit fans kind of riding that high, if you will. Well, we'll let them. It's regular season football. They can have that. We'll see how things end up in a month. We'll come back and certainly talk about how both of these teams are going to be playing in the playoffs. But with that, there is a push to get into the postseason. As I've been saying, I feel like Green Bay is going to finish in that 5 or 6 seed, and they're going to be going back and forth with Minnesota in this. But right behind us, Washington Commanders. I think these are the 3 teams kind of vying for the wild card. When we look at the NFC West and the NFC South, that's where they're competing against each other there, right?
The real question is, are the Commanders going to fall off, given that they've had a number of games that have been relatively weak? I mean, I think it's the Packers versus the Vikings for the 5 versus the 6 seed, unless we do something really stupid over the next couple of games. The Commanders, I think, are hoping to be the 7, but I could see a team from the West doing it, especially if, for example, we beat Seattle and some of those other teams come to play. Certainly, the Rams looked really good yesterday, and the Rams actually having all of their weapons back that they didn't when we played them is something that makes them more dangerous. But I mean, I care about the Packers. I don't really care about who ends up being the 7 seed. And I really only care about the 3 or the 4 seed as it's relevant for us.
But that relevance comes with Washington's remaining schedule, right? Washington is at New Orleans, then they're hosting Philadelphia, they're hosting the Falcons, and then they're at Dallas. I mean, that's realistically, that's 3 wins right there. And then, the question then becomes, how tough do they play Philadelphia in this one? Is that a big precursor for the postseason? Because if Washington finishes in that 7 seed and Philadelphia gets the 2 seed, they're going to see each other in a couple of weeks after that.
Well, you've got a rookie quarterback, though. That's kind of the other thing that's an unknown. Is there going to be production fall off? Is he going to make more rookie mistakes? It's a much longer season than in college. There could be a significant drop off here as well. But yeah, I think there's one team probably from the West, one team from the South that gets in, and that's probably going to be it.
Here's my bottom line. We're not playing the Commanders. I don't fucking care.
Take a look at what Minnesota's got remaining. They are hosting the Bears. Then they are at Seattle. Then they get to host the Green Bay Packers. And then they're at Detroit. They don't have a cakewalk here to finish the season. They get Chicago. But then, Seattle's playing for that spot in the West. And then they've got the Packers and the Lions. That week 18 game, the Lions-Vikings could be one of the marquee matchups of the final weekend.
Fortunately, we've got the last weekend, we've got the Bears in Green Bay. So it'll be Bears week. I'd like to think that would be a win. Who knows? Based on how the Bears have been playing, maybe there'll be a turnaround, but you're right, John. That is a really, really pivotal game, and that may decide the division.
You know, it's actually a pivotal game, the one that we're actually playing this week in Seattle.
Yes. Yeah, the game at Seattle definitely is a big game for Green Bay and probably an even bigger game for Seattle. Now, we look at the NFC West. There's only 2 games separating the 4 teams. Seattle at 8-5, Rams at 7-6, and then the Cardinals and the 49ers each at 6-7. The way the Rams and the 49ers are kind of coming back right now post-injury to their players, they're going to make a serious push. Arizona, such a Jekyll and Hyde team. I don't expect them to make the push here, but really, Seattle has a lot to play for this week.
In addition to that, they're also really good at home. They've got the very infamous home field advantage, but they're sort of a weird team too on this season. They are 8-5 on the season, but they're actually only plus 19 in point differential. So Pythagorean, definitely not as good as that 8-5 record. And you look at their wins. They've beaten Denver in the first week of the season before they sort of had established Bo Nix. New England, Miami when Tua was out, Atlanta, the Niners, Arizona, the Jets, and Arizona again. They have not had a win over an actual good team this year, whereas they've lost to Detroit, the Niners, Buffalo, and the Rams. Okay, acceptable, all of those maybe, but they also lost to the New York Giants as one of their 5 losses.
And we'll come back to the Packers-Seahawks game here in a moment. Let's kind of just wrap this up here in the NFC South. Jeff, you watched that Vikings-Falcons game, and you really feel like Atlanta just doesn't have anything left to them, do they?
No, Kirk Cousins was terrible in his homecoming. They couldn't put anything together. They were very inconsistent. Their defense was awful. We don't know, probably one team coming out. We don't know who that's going to be. And at this point, we have no control over it. So let's move on.
All right. And so Tampa probably by default is going to get that NFC South spot. Just a quick peek at the AFC. Of course, the Chiefs Bills are already set up to be in the playoffs. Steelers playing a lot better than expected. It's probably that AFC South that still has some possibilities to it between the Texans and maybe the Colts there. Dolphins maybe making a late push, but I don't think they're going to get there. Ravens, Chargers, Broncos probably going to wrap up the AFC. Neil, I know how much you care about the AFC. Any comments on that one?
I'm just disappointed in Buffalo's performance yesterday, and I was really hoping that Buffalo could take the 1 seed. And the fact is that they did not take advantage of their opportunities, and Kansas City continues to play with a horseshoe in their ass.
I completely agree that who's the luckier team? The Vikings or Kansas City?
Well, Kansas City at least has the advantage of being an actual good team that's gotten lucky rather than a team that we still don't know how good they are that's been getting lucky, which has been the Vikings.
And we'll probably talk more about the AFC as time rolls on here because we're a Packers podcast and we want to take a look at the NFC, but the AFC really is probably going to fall in place. I just don't see Indy or Miami making a push, and I think that the AFC is pretty much set. Maybe some juxtaposition between Baltimore, the Chargers, and the Broncos.
So we've hammered on all these other divisions, but our division, this is pretty amazing. The Lions, Packers, and Vikings.
Oh my.
Are 28-3 against the rest of the NFL. So our wonderful, wonderful little division, outside of games against each other, none of us have lost since October. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and we've talked about it since then, too. The NFC North playing well, and the 3 teams are going to make the postseason here. But let's take a peek at this Sunday night game at Seattle. Some history here Jeff will get to in a moment, but in the 21st century, the last 16 games, the home team between Green Bay and Seattle has won every game but one. October 12th, 2008, when Green Bay won in Seattle 27-17. So that doesn't really bode well that the home team is always doing better. But Neil, you have some other statistics to take a look at?
Well, I think one of the things is both teams have been consistently good, right? I mean, Seattle's had a pretty good run. Obviously, the Packers have had a really good run. And so when the teams are evenly matched, you're going to have an advantage for that home team. And you look at the Packers at 9-4, Seattle 8-5. You say, well, these are pretty evenly matched teams. But I already told you Seattle is only plus 19 in point differential versus plus 75 for the Packers. And you look at these teams, and there's definitely a larger difference than you might guess just based purely on records. If you look at offensive yards per game, the Packers 6th versus 13th for Seattle. Seattle is actually 2nd in passing yards per game, somewhat surprisingly, but that is obviously countered by being 27th in their rushing yards per games. Packers 10th and 5th. One big difference on offense for these two teams. The Packers have only allowed 16 sacks on the season. That is 2nd in the NFL. whereas Seattle has allowed 40 sacks in the season, makes them 24th in the NFL. So we should have opportunities for a defensive line. This is clearly not one of the strengths of that team. And then conversely, if you look at defensive side, these teams are relatively evenly matched, 13th and 18th, but specifically Seattle's defense doesn't have any one strength. 11th against the pass, 21st against the rush. I think that would be a number that looks good for us. 17th in total sacks. Basically a very similar number for these two teams on defense. So two middling defenses, but some opportunities on offense for us. One big difference is in turnovers. The Packers are +9 on the year. That's 6th. Seattle is -4 on the year in turnovers. That is 23rd. And this is just reflected in the fact that Seattle's passing only has 14 touchdowns with 12 interceptions versus the Packers 24 and 11. So a big difference in sacks and also a significant difference in turnovers. Those seem like the basis for a winning game plan for the Packers.
The passing game in Seattle is what probably is surprising. And we've talked about this a few times. Quarterbacks finding the right system, right? Sam Darnold is having new life in Minnesota, and Geno Smith is really found a spot in Seattle. I think he played way above expectations last year. He's continuing to perform that way. And he's got two great receivers in Jackson Smith and Jigba and DK Metcalf. And if our defensive backfield continues to stay injured or depleted like they are, I fear that it could be a big passing day for Seattle.
Yeah, Sunday nights, it's going to be loud, and that might confuse our offense. You know, if we can't get our offense on track, we have
pre-snap penalties at home, Jeff. Imagine what it's going to be like in Seattle with the 12th man.
My point exactly,
yes.
Jeff. In that Detroit game, I mean, there were some really terrible penalties, but overall, it didn't dictate the game. Both teams had 7 penalties. That's what I'm concerned about in Seattle. Like, just getting with the crowd noise, getting rattled. They can't afford mistakes because, Seattle's tough at home, and they've really got something to play for.
Well, Jeff, the penalties for the Packers game didn't dictate the game because Dan Campbell is a hothead and he's got a team who play like hotheads. So they made as many dumb mistakes for penalties as we did. It's not that we played a clean game at all. I don't think that the number of penalties the Packers had was something that was acceptable. And yes, exactly to your point, that is a potential problem in the atmosphere of Seattle.
And the Packers and the Seahawks have played each other 24 times since the Seattle Seahawks came into existence. Now, the first 8 matchups between the two teams, Seattle was in the AFC. Green Bay and Seattle split those 4-4. Green Bay with a distinct advantage since then. 15-9, Green Bay leads the series. But there were some very significant games, Jeff, between these two teams.
That's right. So Seattle began playing in 1976, and again, in the NFC under coach Jack Patera. So the Seahawks recorded their first winning season 2 years later in 1978, and Patera was named NFL Coach of the Year in 1979. So in 1978, the Seattle Seahawks switched to the AFC, and they were in the AFC from 1978 to 2001, and in 2002, they returned to the NFC. In 1983, Chuck Knox became head coach and had a great deal of success. He led the Seahawks to the AFC Championship game in that 1983 season. The Seahawks claimed their first NFC Championship in the 2005 season and went to their first Super Bowl, losing to the Pittsburgh Steelers 21-10. So Seattle has been to the Super Bowl 3 times, winning one in 2013 against the Denver Broncos, a blowout 43-8. So the Packers and Seahawks have played each other only 20 times in the regular season. The Packers have a 12-8 advantage there. Postseason, Packers are 3-1. The only loss in 2014 when the Seahawks went to their second straight Super Bowl, eventually losing to the New England Patriots 28-24. Although only playing each other 24 times, these teams have really had some odd, memorable games, both for good reasons and bad reasons. Bad, the Fail Mary in 2012. The NFC Championship meltdown in 2014 when we were ahead 16-0 late in the game. But then the good, the 2003 wild card in Green Bay when Matt Hasselbeck told the Lambeau Field faithful, as well as a national television audience, we want the ball and we're going to score. Well, we all know what happened. He threw a pick six that was returned by Al Harris, and that play resulted in the first NFL overtime playoff game in history to end with a defensive touchdown.
That 2003 wild card game is one of my favorite games that I've been to at Lambeau Field, one of the first playoff games that I went to after they expanded the stadium. But my favorite Packers playoff game ever that I've attended at Lambeau was the 2007 divisional game against Seattle. That was the snowball game. This was Brett Favre's, what ended up being his second to last game. It was a 42-20 demolishing of the Seattle Seahawks. Donald Driver and Brett Favre throwing snowballs at each other. Favre 3 touchdown passes, and Ryan Grant with over 200 yards of rushing, over 440 yards of total offense for the Packers. It was just an absolutely glorious day. You had the snow, you had the Packers playing in the playoffs. It was a beautiful day, and I am hoping that someday I will have a better game in Lambeau, but right now that is my favorite game ever at Lambeau.
And fans, brace yourselves. Yes, we're nearing the 10-year anniversary of that NFC Championship game in Seattle. And yeah, this game being prime time, yeah, you're going to get some PTSD this week if you're online or even probably going into the Sunday night game on NBC, right? You'll see that game quite a bit. So just brace yourselves. Bygones are bygones. But really where we are right now, there's only 4 games left in this season, 4 weeks left in the regular season. It has flown by. So after this, we get to look forward to coming back home for New Orleans, at Minnesota, and then Chicago to wrap up the season. When we made our original picks, you guys, all 3 of us took Green Bay to win this game at Seattle. Are you sticking with that prognostication?
The Packers have a little extra time because they played on Thursday and don't play again until Sunday night. I'm always a little bit leery of our plan for any West Coast games, but I think that the Packers are going to come out of this Detroit game with a little bit of an edge. They know they left something on the field, and they're not going to accept losing. Yes, I'm afraid of playing in Seattle, but I think that the Packers are going to have that emotional edge, and I think that globally we are also a better team. I think the Packers win this in a close game. Go Pack, go.
Sunday night's game will probably be another thriller. These teams are pretty evenly matched. I'm really hoping that the Packers can bounce back from that loss in Detroit. I was hoping last week that the Packers would come out in Detroit and they would assert themselves, and they did not. So they're sort of running out of time in order to do that. So hopefully, with a little extra prep this week and not being intimidated by the 12th man, they can overcome the 12th man, get to 10 wins, and start a stretch of winning football to close out the season. Go Pack, go.
Yeah, and again, my concern is going to be the defensive backfield. If they are healthy, they're going to play strong. If not, it could be a strong passing game for Seattle, but I am sticking with a Packer win for this one. It should be noted, you guys, our friend Dave, who lives in the Seattle area, is going to the Sunday night game in Seattle, and then he's coming home. And we will see him against New Orleans. So, Dave, have fun with both of those games. And everyone else, if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit subscribe and leave a comment. You can find the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat. That is all one word. We are on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Blue Sky, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. On Facebook, it's the GBC podcast Green Bay Chat. And you can follow us on any and all of those social media platforms. And may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.